All right, click the links to join me over on Subscribestar or Locals or the various other links. So everything wrong with and/or Star Wars in about 5 minutes. If this one image doesn't tell you, doesn't speak volumes, nothing horribly wrong with this image as long as it's a scene that's like a 10-second long flash to scene to show like a look of expiration on somebody's face, and like the camera pans back and forth to one or the other, shows them like ennui or something. A scene that has a point to it, and then quickly go back to action, which Star Wars should be focused on, action. Let's compare this to the something. The funny thing is, modern Star Wars really only works if you haven't seen the original Star Wars. Even then, I think Star Wars, Disney Star Wars is doomed. I think Disney itself is in deep trouble, though they have a lot of cash to burn through. So if you're not familiar with and/or Star Wars, and you're probably not, it's a streaming show, or you might have heard the name, and it's like they're streaming Disney shows I haven't. Like, oh, Obi-Wan had a show. Oh, yeah. And then like the Mandalorian had a spinoff. Really, it seems like it's not big enough to support a spinoff, especially after firing Gina Carano, which is not really like publicly. It's not really huge in the public, but the people who are watching this kind of geek culture, like, they're aware of it. And there's a pretty good chunk of the audience that sees stuff like the Gina Carano thing, and Disney starting to get weird in Florida, and the libs of TikTok, and the DeSantos battles, and the everything is BLT. It's like the people who are focusing on these kind of Disney Star Wars streaming shows are more likely to be aware of the stuff behind the scenes. And yeah, if you're on the left wing, you're going to be on board. But if you're a moderate, or if you're on the right, you're not going to be on board. And that's a part of your audience too. And green money is green money. It all spends the same. So if you're familiar with the original Star Wars, like you're in your 40s, you look at these new offerings, like, dear God. I mean, the only thing that probably saves Disney is, one, the name recognition, but also probably the hope that younger people haven't seen the original Star Wars. Because I go back and watch this stuff every once in a while. Every few years, I'll watch some of it to kind of get a vibe of it. I think it holds up really, really well, especially in terms of storytelling and the progression of a narrative of Luke and, good versus evil. I think that part of it I think a lot of it holds up. Even the technology holds up very well using actual models and not CGI. It's like, that was 50 years ago, and the actual models look better than modern CGI, which is amazing. Anyway, so it's a streaming show on Disney, which is where streaming shows in general, streaming platforms, it's a subscription service you pay for, usually $10 to $20 a month, which is where bad shows go. And then people are they can bundle programs and, to get more shows, ESPN and Hulu and all this kind of stuff, and you end up paying more for it. The thing is, you start adding this up, and you go, oh, this is like $100 a month for all these shows, and you got to realize, like, okay, well, what's the cost per show that you watch? And you break it down, you're like, oh, this is not worth it. And eventually people come to that recognition. Anyway, so streaming platforms are where bad shows go, is what it seems like. But people are paying, $15 a month for those bad shows. So if you like one network, you might pay the $15 a month for one network. But it's like you're gonna have to watch a certain amount, otherwise you realize, like, you just kind of have this network, and every month it's taken off, it's charging you for it, and you realize, like, I'm just getting ripped off to like $200 a year to pay for something that, like, you could find the stuff elsewhere, or even if you had to buy like DVDs or something. Anyway, so I suspect eventually people are gonna look elsewhere for their bread and circuses, and there's a lot of stuff like social media, YouTube, Odyssey. Nick Rekieta's on Odyssey now. I did a live stream with like 1,000 people on Odyssey, which is amazing. There's a lot of other people on there, and Shing, and I think he might be going to Twitch too. But I mean, the point is that there's a lot of stuff that, like, there's only 24 hours in the day, and so for every minute you're watching some YouTuber or some alt platform, it's a minute that you're not watching the mainstream stuff. And the thing is, in this digital age, you really got to have a pretty good customer relationship to get people to pay for stuff when they can go, to Solar or 123 and all these other sites and find the same thing online, or, a torrent and a VPN and, some external hard drives. It's like, you got to really have a good relationship with Disney, and you look at what Disney's doing lately, and you realize, I don't think people have that kind of relationship with Disney. It's not you're not supporting a family company like it used to be. You're supporting Disney's something else. Disney is not the Disney it was in 1995 when they were making all those like. I think it peaked in the 90s. They had a huge following. I think that's when Disney really blew up with all their animation. Anyway, so you're paying for these bad shows, and I think eventually people are going to kind of go, this is probably not worth it, because this isn't the days of like Sex and the City. Was that back in the 90s? The original? I know they've got a lot of other iterations of it, but the original one that came out, I think it was the late 90s, that was huge. I mean, that show was a massive hit. That was everyone knew about it, even if I don't think I ever saw an episode. Maybe I saw one episode and it was horrible, but it wasn't geared to me, but everyone knew about that show. And then after that, Sopranos and Game of Thrones, those were huge hits, massive name recognition, and they're so popular they're able to spawn spin-offs because those were billion-dollar properties. The thing is, with these Disney Star Wars, nobody's heard of these shows, and for good reason. Disney sucks now. They have lost their freaking minds with woke cancer. Everything is some Marxist critical theory, identity politics. Most people are sick unto death about this narrative. People are just not into it. But the thing is, it's not about money for these companies. It's literally about pushing propaganda. They will burn the companies to the ground to push this narrative. The show's only purpose, I think, is to put non-blonde characters into roles and then have people vaguely criticize it on social media, and then they call the customers Islamophobic, and then they get people to, I guess, maybe sign up, and they're hoping that Disney's part of the culture war, which they very much are. And maybe they hope like own the Chad Hugo Boss types and sign up to Disney to fight the culture war. It's like, yeah, Disney's a multi-billion-dollar parasite demon company. It's or not. You don't have to support Disney even if you're on the left. The thing is, the story with these streaming platforms and any of these shows, it doesn't seem to matter, especially with Star Wars. You just make sure that the background characters are POCs, and the background looks like Los Angeles, which means it takes you out of the story. It very much does take you out of the story because it looks like an LA casting call. Like you went to, I don't know, not Hollywood. What's that place by the beach? You could just like sit down there and just hire the first 100 people and go, hey, we need background people for this Star Wars show, and like it would look no, I don't remember. Beverly Hills, yeah, Beverly Hills. It would look exactly like that. It's like, oh, hey, we've got representation. It's like, yeah, but does that feel like Star Wars? Because this looks exactly like Los Angeles. And it's not politically correct to say it, but Disney Star Wars doesn't feel like Star Wars. Political correctness has tied these people into knots. They can't tell stories that feel authentic because they've got to meet this diversity checklist. And, nowadays that obviously includes representing BLT characters, but it's forced and people can tell what propaganda is. I mean, this stuff is really heavy-handed. And most people just don't want woke stories. They're not going to talk about it publicly because if you're on social media, immediately you'll get attacked. And you're like, I'm addressing the show storyline, and you're attacking the person who's making the argument. Why don't you attack the argument of why you feel this makes a better story? It's like, well, it doesn't make a better story to have the two girls kissing in the background of whatever Star Wars. And like, yeah, I mean that would be one point. You'd be making one point, but then you pull it for China and for other countries. So you're not making the point. Like, why would you pull that for those countries that don't want to see it? I mean, you're just pushing propaganda to the West, and you're not pushing it where it affects your bottom line. It's like, so you guys are hypocrites. It's like, oh yeah, obviously they are. It's, they have all these businesses around the world have the little rainbow flags, but in certain areas of the world they don't change their country their social media icons to rainbow flags in certain areas of the world. It's like, oh, so you guys have been hypocrites the whole time. Like, why are you doing it for America? Because there's no consequences for it. Anyway, all this stuff is forced. I mean, you got even casual viewers, I think, are watching a lot of this stuff. And I'm like, I'm just tired of this kind of stuff. When Solo came out a couple years ago and it bombed, that should have been a good clue for people. But the thing is, it's not about money, and I think once people realize that, alternative forms of pop culture are going to start to pop up. Star Wars has absolutely trapped themselves in a woke box, which is not as fun as it sounds, which is why you see in Andor the only safe target is the United Kingdom stand-in for the Empire, which is, or whatever they call it, which is, obviously the stand-in for the Empire. And then the protagonists are giving a thinly veiled lecture about the Fat Cats, which he seems to include his partner in. The only reason they included that scene is because the partner was a shade lighter, so he was automatically assumed to be evil. I mean, this stuff is like, this is right below the surface. It's not that deep to read their dog whistles. And they go, "You guys dog whistle." It's like, yeah, Star Wars also dog whistles, but I mean, across the audible spectrum, everything with Disney, Amazon, and the rest is going to be about a schism between the races, because that's the mainstream media's only story now, and it is 100% guaranteed the future of these pop culture companies. That's not going to change. These people are not trying to make money. They just hate you, and they're pushing a narrative. Anyway, one specific bit of critique for Andor is that when it's not the Englishman bad narrative, they've got a lot of filler material where people are sitting at a futuristic table with Tupperware from 1975. That's not what Star Wars is all about. Scenes have to advance the story, so a seated scene has to have some point, like romantic tension between Han and Leia, or Darth Vader at the head of a table as a threat, or Luke arguing about leaving the farm and setting up the story that, he's the pilot and whomping swamp rats or whatever, or and set up the story that he's a very good pilot, or he's got some preternatural skill at it, which is also kind of advancing that he's a Jedi, or he's whatever you call it. He's someone who's strong in the Force. It's like that original New Hope in '77. It telegraphed all the stuff that was going to make sense later in the show, to show that he had these skills because he was strong in the Force. And later, Disney Star Wars didn't do any of those things. You just had the Mary Sue character, who was just insane, doing just the most insane tricks. You turned her into a space god because she's a woman. That's the only reason you did that. Like, yeah, but you didn't set up any of this. I am all the Jedi. It's like, oh, just shut up. God, that was horrible. Or the cantina scene, where the reason they wretched hive of scum and villainy, they go in the cantina, that's an amazing scene, because it's to overwhelm you with how weird everything was. Like, this is the Star Wars universe. You're not on Earth. You're all these people are in costumes, but it's to tell you that you're somewhere very different. This is not. It's to immerse you in the story, and it worked amazingly well. They go into a dark cantina, and you see all these amazing costumes, and the band is playing their space saxophones. That was a killer. Like, people think of Star Wars and they think of that scene, and modern Star Wars doesn't have any of that kind of vibe. And it was to show them finding a pilot so they can complete the mission and have a little conflict. And it's like everything was the whole point. All three of the original trilogies, like, they're moving along quickly, and the modern stuff is something like this, which is a beautiful scene. I know they had a great time designing these sets. That was a lot of fun. Lucas's prequels had some problems with this. I mean, those had their own problems for sure. But it's something like this. Again, this has got to be a real quick scene, because Star Wars is all about moving the plot along. And the way you write filler material is to have romantic filler material, not scenes where he's like talking to his mom over blue milk in a Tupperware container. That's the wrong kind of filler material. And I mean, all the stuff has it, like She-Hulk and all these other shows. They're all doing the same kind of thing, where I can't imagine anyone watching any of these shows, like, unless you're going to talk about them or hate watching them for free or something. Anyway, one small little criticism about Star Wars. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. See you guys all next episode.